Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's regional COVID-19 open forum call. Today, we will be focused on motivational interviewing strategies for vaccination readiness. Before we get started, I want to go over some quick reminders. So first of all, please mute yourself when you're not speaking, and remember to unmute yourself and state your name, state, and organization when participating. And if you're participating just by phone, you'll need to press *6 to unmute. Always remember, we ask that you do not disclose any personal health information during any of these calls. And if you're having any trouble with Zoom, you can message Tony Kettner in the chat box and she should be able to help assist you. And then if you do have any questions or comments during the presentation, please chat them to everyone so everyone can benefit from all of the conversation today. I'm excited to introduce the expert who will be leading us through the call today, Mia Croyle. Mia is a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers and a Superior Health Quality Alliance team member. She'll be hosting additional motivational interviewing opportunities in the future through Superior Health. So if you're interested in this topic, be on the lookout for more opportunities to learn about motivational interviewing. With that, I'll invite Mia to take the floor.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and welcome. I'm pleased to see so many of you join. And really, as we think about the objective for our time together today, I really am hoping to just share with you some elements of motivational interviewing that might help us with these challenging conversations about vaccines that so many of us are engaging in these days, and help us think together about how we can promote readiness through the course of those conversations. I also hope that at the end of this call, we'll have some time for an open forum sharing so that we can hear both about the challenges that you're having and some of the things that you've experienced that have been useful for you in the course of these conversations, so that we can all learn from one another as we move through these continuous challenging times. Next slide. So just as a way of sort of setting the stage, what is motivational interviewing? So motivational interviewing is evidence-based. It's an approach used for communication. So it's a collaborative, goal-oriented, particular style of communication. And it pays really close attention to language, both the language we use and the language that the other person uses in the conversation. It's specifically designed for conversations where we're looking to strengthen someone's motivation or commitment to a specific goal. And one of the main ways that it does that is by eliciting or drawing out and exploring the other person's own reasons for change or for a particular behavior. And it does all of that within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So that's a mouthful. When I think about it in plain language, what is motivational interviewing? Motivational interviewing is a way that we can support people as they look to make behavior changes, or we hope to guide them in behavior changes where the other person might be feeling ambivalent about the way forward. Next slide. So before we start looking at some particular skills and strategies, one of the key things in motivational interviewing is the mindset, or just sort of the way that we approach the situation. So we're going to talk a little bit about the motivational interviewing mindset. Sometimes that's called the spirit or the style that we use in motivational interviewing. You can move to the next slide. And one of the things before we start getting into the content that I think is important is to just sort of reset our expectations around what motivational interviewing might be able to offer and what we expect as we enter into conversations about vaccine readiness. We know that difficult conversations are inevitable, and we know that there's no guarantee, with or without motivational interviewing, of any one particular outcome. Sometimes our conversations will end with a resolution, and hopefully a positive resolution. Sometimes they'll end in some sort of a compromise or some agreed upon next steps. in our path forward. And sometimes these conversations will just end and the situation won't be resolved and we won't have the outcome that we've been looking for, but the conversation will end. We know that the motivational interviewing techniques are very effective with some people. And we also know that they're not going to work for everyone. This certainly isn't the one and only answer to how to promote readiness for vaccines. It's important as we move into these to have some grace for ourselves as well, and to know that you shouldn't feel like you've failed in the conversation if you aren't able to change the other person's mind. One of the key things that comes into play as we think about talking to people about difficult things is this concept of psychological reactance. And that's a fancy schmancy way of just saying, that people don't like to be told what to do. When people feel like someone is taking away their choice and their control, they tend to react negatively. That's not a personality flaw that one individual has or something unique to any one subgroup. That's a pretty universal thing. We don't like people to take away our sense of choice and control. Our brains perceive that as a threat. And so the way that our brains as human beings respond to threats is that our fight or flight response gets activated. We respond in a way that is protective of survival. So when we feel threatened, when we feel like our autonomy or our control over our own selves is at jeopardy, we respond accordingly. So hopefully we don't see the fight or flight response happening like physically. So we're not, sitting having a conversation with someone about vaccines and they, start to try and wrestle with us, or we hopefully don't see them jump up and run out of the room, but we see that happen in sort of the interpersonal level and in their interactions with us. So some people become very defensive and argumentative. Some people become very avoidant and try to do everything they can just to get out of the conversation, and that is a normal part of having conversations where people might feel like their autonomy is being threatened. You can go to the next slide. Another key concept as we think about this is ambivalence. And one of the things that ambivalence is a defining feature of a lot of decisions and a lot of change process. So ambivalence just really means feeling two ways about something. So having arguments for and against it. And when those arguments are sort of in competition internally, people feel conflicted. We know that ambivalence is very fluid, so it shifts and changes, and it can be impacted quite a bit by other people and by the way that we approach our conversations with them. Next slide. So as we enter into these conversations, we want to set our intention and think about what is the purpose that we're entering these conversations with. So if we enter with the purpose of increasing the person's motivation to get the vaccine, and enter in with the thought that we want to partner with the other person, we want to support an atmosphere of acceptance, and we want to draw out their own sources of motivation, we are likely to have greater success than if we enter into the conversation with the mindset that our purpose is to twist their arm, persuade them, and convince them. Next slide. So as we think, I think you jumped too ahead. So as we think about partnership, or we can do evoking. If we think about evoking, we want to draw out the other person's own perspectives. That's where we're going to find their point of view and hopefully their sources of motivation to get ready to get the vaccine. So we want to create opportunities for the other person to give voice to their own arguments in favor of getting vaccinated. So if we think about that pro cons, right? What are the pros? What would getting vaccinated, what positive things would it bring for you? And we know that people need to feel safe in their conversations with us before they're comfortable giving voice to both sides of that ambivalence. So we work to create safety in the context of the conversation. And then And then we work to draw out their perspectives and their points of view. If you're able to go back 2 slides. Okay, and partnership. So as we think about how do we cultivate partnership in the context of these conversations, we want to make sure that we're communicating a message of respect and trust and a desire to collaborate or partner with them. We want to get curious and interested in the other person's point of view. I think oftentimes, as we enter into these conversations, we might have our sort of territory and our point of view very firmly entrenched, and so we enter in not really wanting to hear and understand and having a lot of empathy for the other person's point of view. So we want to show them that we do value their perspective, and we do want to hear what their thoughts are, what their experience has been, and sort of where they're at with their thinking about the vaccine. And as we think about a partnership, both people have something very important to contribute. So we enter in with some specific expertise, and the other person is also an expert on themselves. And so we have to have due respect for both elements of that. Next slide. And then acceptance. And this is a key part if we think back to what we talked about with psychological reactance. The sort of antidote for that, or the cure for that, is having this attitude of acceptance. So we want to maintain this approach that no matter how close my viewpoint is to you, no matter how far apart our views are, I still accept you and your value and still value your point of view. We want to avoid getting into a strong judgmental stance. They may have opinions that are hard for you to understand, but we want to avoid sort of having that strong reaction to what they're saying and avoid judging them. We also want to do some specific things, and this is one of the key things we look to do in motivational interviewing, to enhance the other person's experience of power and control in the conversation. And so one of the ways we do that is just by directly making statements and asking questions that are going to support the other person's autonomy or sort of their self-control. So saying things like, ultimately, it's your choice, or only you can decide what's right for you. And what we find is that paradoxically, when that perception of having to push against something or someone goes away, that's when people can relax, let their defenses down a little bit, and when you can enter more productively into dialogue. So if you think about tug of war, and if you're playing a game of tug of war with the other person, you can both pull on that rope, and eventually, you know, one might tire out or one might get stronger than the other and win the game of tug of war. But if you just don't pick up your side of the rope, then it's not a very good game of tug of war. There's not much they can do to fight against you if you're just not holding that other end of the rope. And so when we do things and say things to emphasize the other person's autonomy, what we're effectively doing is saying, I'm going to play a different game. I'm not going to play tug of war with you. Instead, I'm going to say, you're right. You're holding the rope. You own that whole entire rope. That rope is yours. And emphasize that for them. And then they don't feel like they need to yank on the rope so much. And when they're not spending their energy yanking on the rope, they have energy to have conversation with you and really explore the issue. All right, if we can go ahead 2 slides. There we go. So we're going to look at some particular skills that help us support that whole mindset and that way of being. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on this, and then we're going to look at a particular strategy, and then we'll have some time for dialogue. So you can go to the next slide. So as we think about our main skills, if you've heard anything about motivational interviewing before, you've probably heard about the ORs. So we're going to look at 3 of those. We're not going to look at the S right now, just because for the purposes of time, we had to make some choices. Open questions are, pretty basic to understand what it is. It's a question that asks for more than just a yes or a no or a set response. Our affirmations really emphasize the other person's strength and efforts and values. And our reflections are when we restate or offer back what the other person has said. Next slide. So as we think about how do we build those open questions, those are the questions that, again, they're asking for more than just a yes, no, or one set response. What is your age? That's not really an open question. There may be a few different responses you could give at any given time, but really that's, there's one set response to that. So one of the key things in building our open questions and creating them is to just have a curiosity about the other person. And we want to make sure that that curiosity is partnered with compassion. So, not a hurtful curiosity, not a gossipy curiosity, not a judgmental curiosity, just a real openness and a real wondering about what's going on. We don't want to build our open questions in a way that they feel like sort of traps or gotcha questions. Generally, open questions start with either a how or a what. So if you're thinking, I'm not sure how to build one of these, if you start your sentence with a how or a what, you're more likely to have that end with an open, as being an open question. Technically, questions that start with a why are also tend to be open. They have more than one right answer, but strategically, we want to avoid them if we can, because they can be perceived as judgmental. Why did you do that? Why do you think that? Why is that your point of view? Those can feel a little judgmental, and we're really working hard to stay out of that space of putting the other person in a defensive mode. So some nice all-purpose open questions or open question starters that I kind of think of these as my back pocket ones. If I'm not sure what else to ask, I might say, can you give me an example of that? Can you give me an example of a time that happened? Or asking to hear more about their experience. What was that like for you? And this one technically isn't a question if we're following strict grammar rules, but we call it an open question. Tell me more about. So tell me more about what you heard. Tell me more about how you think that would go. Tell me more about what you experienced. So it's a really nice, and you can even keep it short and sweet and just say, oh, tell me more about that. That's one that I use if I'm not yet sure I understand what the other person is getting at, and I just need them to say more. Tell me more about that. I sound curious, I sound interested, and I'm encouraging them to continue. Next slide. So some examples of open questions. And you will have an opportunity to have these slides, so don't feel like you need to scribble them down if you're looking to copy these examples down. But some examples of open questions you might ask in the context of conversations about the vaccine. How are you feeling about getting the COVID-19 vaccine? What are your current thoughts about the vaccine? What do you know about the vaccine? What do you know about how it works? What do you know about the side effects, etc.? What questions do you have about the vaccine? How could you get more information? What would help you feel more ready to get the vaccine? What are your concerns if you don't get the vaccine? How will you know when you are ready to get the vaccine? And I just want to call attention to that last one, because that's a question that a type of question that I really like when I'm having conversations and I feel really stuck. It feels like the other person is really firmly entrenched in their point of view and their decision to not take action. This is one that is very respectful of where they're at and their autonomy, and it continues to sort of nudge them to look forward, and it reinforces this idea that they do have what they need, so they'll know. It sort of reinforces this idea that they have some self-awareness and some self-knowledge, and they're capable of making good decisions for themselves. And it just asks them to sort of imagine forward. What would those conditions have to be? And a lot of times I find that I ask that question sort of as a last ditch effort to, I think I'm going to wrap up the conversation. And then when I ask that question, they start imagining the future where it will be time. And then that future starts to feel more immediate to them. And then that translates into movement. I've had several times, not particularly in vaccine conversations, but in conversations about other behavior changes where, particularly I can remember one conversation about going into substance use disorder treatment. And I said, well, how will you know when it is time and when you are ready to go into treatment? And 5 minutes later, the person was wanting me to get on the phone with them and call and get them into treatment, because they were sort of saying like, gosh, I can't imagine what else would have to happen for me to feel ready. Maybe I'm just feeling ready now. So sometimes these questions can open doors that we don't even anticipate. You can go ahead. All right. So our affirmations, like we said, they're statements that really call out or highlight a strength or a value or some effort in action. And so we want to think about what resources does the person have? What are we hearing in the conversation that could be supportive of their decision to get vaccinated? And we offer those as a statement. And often our statements just are as simple as starting with a you. So we're pointing out to the other person what we see. Next slide. So here are some potential examples. The challenge with sharing examples for you on this is, outside of the context of a whole conversation, you wouldn't just pull one of these out of the blue. You really would want to feel genuine about saying these things to the other person. So hopefully you would hear or see something in the course of the conversation that sort of brings that to the forefront for you, or that shows you that, yeah, there is evidence of this. But some that I could definitely imagine happening or being appropriate in the context of these conversations are things like, you really care about this. You've been thinking about this a lot. You've really been weighing this decision. Your commitment to your health is obvious. You're thoughtful in your decision making. You want the best for your family's health. You're someone who makes up your own mind. Now, none of these said you're making the right decision, or I agree with the conclusions you've reached, right? And they don't require us to have that stance, but they do require us to be capable of looking at the person and saying, even though you're making a decision right now that I don't think is the right one, I can still see the value in you as a human being. Your efforts are leading you somewhat to a conclusion that I think is the wrong one, but you're still working hard to make that decision. So and that really helps. It helps with that partnership. It helps build the other person's self-confidence and sense of self-efficacy, and it helps them feel more safe in the context of the conversation. It helps them feel valued and prioritized, and like you're not out there trying to coerce them. It feels like they're in a conversation with a valued partner. And the fact of the matter is that for some people, no matter how skillful we are in our conversations with them, they're ultimately not going to make the decision to get a vaccination. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. There are going to be some people who choose to not get vaccinated. And we want to think about, how can we still support having a positive relationship with that person? Even though ultimately the decision they make may mean that they're no longer working for us. But how can we still have that be a positive experience? And at least a respectful and partnering experience. Next slide. So reflective listening is really one of our main skills in motivational interviewing. And our reflections are really just that. We reflect back what we're hearing from the other person. So a reflection is a statement. It's not a question. It's a sentence that ends in a period. And it really aims to mirror back either what the other person said, or more often what they might have meant. So it can be really simple where I call those the parrots, where we're just reflecting back the other person's words, or our more complex reflections really try to paraphrase or capture some of the unspoken meaning that the other person is conveying to you, what you're hearing sort of under the surface of what they're saying. You get to choose what you reflect and what you don't reflect, and that will help shape the conversation. So one of the things that we really want to intentionally choose to reflect is anything that sounds like their potential arguments for getting vaccinated. Most reflections start with either just you or it's. And we want to avoid overusing those sentence starters like sounds like, or what I think I hear you saying is. Sometimes when we talk about another way of talking about reflections is active listening. And sometimes when we talk about active listening, they really encourage you to use those things. And with motivational interviewing, we kind of say, hey, we want you to sound more conversational and natural. We don't want it to feel like a gimmick to the person that you're talking to. And if you overuse those sentence starters, it can start to feel gimmicky and techniquey to the other person as opposed to conversational. So that's why we offer the caution to just not overuse those. So we're going to look at an example of a reflective listening. You can go to the next slide, or of a reflection. So you can't do a reflection without something that the other person said. So we have here, this is potentially something someone might say: the vaccine just doesn't seem safe to me. It came out so fast, and I don't think it's been tested enough. I'll probably get it eventually. I just want to wait and see how things go. So some potential reflections in response to that statement are: you're worried about safety. It's confusing to you how they developed the vaccine so quickly. You want to know the vaccine you get is one you can trust. You're leaning toward getting the vaccine at some point. You're interested to see how things go. What's not on this list is education or correction. Well, really, what you need to know is that it didn't really come out that fast. It was under development. There's a lot we can offer, but doing motivational interviewing doesn't say you don't get to share that information. It just says pause a beat first. First, show the other person that you hear them and that you're really trying to value and understand their perspective. And that's what our reflective listening does. It just bounces back what they said, kind of tries to flesh it out a little bit, gives you an opportunity to spend some time in the other person's perspective. Down the road, you could say, would it be, if you reflected, it's confusing to you how they developed the vaccine so quickly. And the other person says, yeah, those things take years. And how did it come out in just a few months? Then you could offer and say, would it be okay if I share with you a little bit about what I've learned about how they were able to get the vaccine out so quickly? And then you could share the information, assuming that they say okay. But if we jump straight from this statement that the other person might make into correcting them or educating them, they feel dismissed. And that's when that's when we start to see some of that psychological reactance that we talked about at the beginning. That's when they start to push back and feel defensive. Because what you're communicating to them, and if you do that, is your point of view is wrong. Let me correct you. And that feels like a loss of control, which is threatening to people. You can go ahead to the next slide. So we're going to look at just a couple brief strategies, and then we will have some time for discussion. Next slide. So the first one is, how do I share information in a motivational interviewing type of way? So one of the main ways that we encourage people when there's a time for information sharing, when it seems appropriate or necessary in the course of the conversation, it's not always necessary, but when it feels like it is, we want to do that within the style of motivational interviewing, still supporting our partnership and autonomy, making sure the other person feels valued and heard, and that we're drawing out their perspective through the process. So this little 3-step process sometimes goes by different names. It's the same process. You may have heard of it as ask, tell, ask, or elicit, provide, elicit. I have it here as explore, offer, explore. All three are just 3 different ways of talking about exactly the same thing, just to keep it complicated. So that first explore is really where we dig in and we try to explore, what does the person already know, or what do they already think about this issue? So tell me what you already know about, side effects of the vaccine, if they're concerned about side effects. And I think I'm going to go in and do some education about side effects. First, I want to ask, tell me what you already know. What have you already heard about side effects? I might, if I don't think they have a whole lot of existing knowledge, I might ask about what they're interested. What are you most interested in hearing more about in regards to side effects? And then I want to make sure before I shift to the second step that I have their permission to move forward. So sometimes I'll attempt to go and do this whole process, and I start with the first explore. And what I find out is that they already know all the things I thought I needed to tell them anyway. And then I can just stop there, because we find that sometimes it's not a lack of information that is causing inaction or blocking the change. Sometimes it's something else. But assuming that we need to go on to step 2, or we feel the need to go on to step 2, we want to make sure that we have their permission. That just sounds really simple. It can be something like, is it okay with you if I share a little bit about what I know or what I've learned or what I've heard from other people? And most of the time, people are going to say yes. If somebody says no, that we have to respect the no. And also, if somebody says no, that's just a good signal to me that they're not ready. I might, circle back around and see what else can I do. If they're not ready to hear some more information or education, what else would be helpful for them? Or it may just be a signal that that's a time for the conversation to end with us now. And I might want to try again later, another time, have someone else try, to use a different approach. If someone's going to, turn down the opportunity for me to share a little information in the context of a conversation. Assuming they say yes, which the vast majority of people will, then you can offer the information. And we're pretty good about that. We know how to share information in an accessible way. We want to offer it in small bits of knowledge, checking in frequently. If we're making recommendations for an action, we might give them a menu of options. You could do this, this, or this. Or I've seen other people do this, this, or this. And then after we do that offer, that third step is very important, where we explore with them, what do they make of this information? We're asking them to do something with it. And what we know is that information it's more sticky. It tends to Velcro on to people a little better if we spend some time with them in this third step, the explore at the end. So we want to hear, what are their reactions? Well, how does that sound to you? What do you make of that information? We might ask about ideas. Did those suggestions trigger any new ideas for you? What are your thoughts about this? Having heard that, what are you thinking now? We may ask about next steps. What do you think you might do? Given that information, what do you think you might do? And we also might want to check in about if they need clarification or have any questions about what we shared. That's the one, if we do anything in that last explore, we usually do the questions. And we usually ask it in a closed way. Do you have any questions? So if we think about how could we open that question up, we could just ask, what questions do you have about what I shared? Go on to the next slide. So how might this look in the context of a vaccine conversation? It sounds like you have some questions about so this is the same example that we looked at our reflective listening statement. It sounds like you have some questions about the safety of the vaccine. What have you already learned about vaccine safety? And then I'm gonna listen and reflect on what they share. I can't script that out for you because I don't know what the other person's going to share. That's where it becomes a choose your own adventure. But whatever they say, we want to do some good listening and reflective listening. We don't just ask it sort of to check the box. Oh, I asked it. We ask it with the intent of really listening. And then after we've heard that, we could ask, is it okay if I share with you some of what I've learned? You're right that the process, assuming they say yes, you're right that the process was a lot quicker than usual. Part of the reason is because a lot of the work to develop this kind of vaccine had already been done, and they just had to customize it to COVID-19. The other reason for the speed is that a lot of money and resources were all focused on developing this one vaccine. Then I'm going to switch to my third step. That was a lot of information. What are your thoughts? What are you curious to hear more about? Or where does this information leave you? I wouldn't ask all three of those questions, boom, boom, boom. It starts to feel like an inquisition, but pick, kind of based on what you're seeing, not when the nonverbals and where the other person is in the context of the whole conversation, pick one of those and ask it and see where it leads you. Next slide. Another strategy you might use is, we call them the change talk rulers. So you could ask them, on a scale of 0 to 10, how ready are you feeling to get a vaccine? Now, the purpose of using those rulers is not to get a score and make some decision based on that. The purpose of this is a strategy, and it's specifically designed to draw out their change talk. So it's a conversational strategy, absolutely not a assessment tool in any way. Because someone's 3 could be the same as someone else's 7. We just don't know. But what we want to do when we ask that, a couple things, we want to have our low end of the scale being a 0 and not a 1, because people are really unlikely to pick a 0. And some people might find it hard to do that just auditorily, so we might want to draw the little ruler out on a piece of paper if we're sitting face to face with someone. So, on the scale of 0 to 10, 0 being not at all ready, 10 being the most ready you can imagine, how ready are you feeling today to move forward with getting the vaccine? Next slide. And then the important thing is not what number they pick. The important thing is the conversation that you have after they pick a number. So assuming they pick a 3, I would say, tell me about that 3. And then I also might say, why are you at a 3 and not a 1 or a 2? What they're going to tell me is, why are they as high as they are? It doesn't even have to be a sky high number. You also can ask, and I actually prefer this last one to the second one, but you could ask them, what would have to happen to move you from a 3 to maybe a 4 or a 5? So this is one, these rulers, totally not in the context of vaccines, but these rulers are something I use sometimes to check in with my kids. On a scale of 0 to 10, how was your day? And if they say a 7, I say, oh, tell me about that 7. They tell me the good stuff and the hard stuff. And I say, what would it take for your day to have been an 8 or a 9? What would have had to happen differently? And then I can hear about, and that's usually an opportunity for me to hear about some of the hard stuff in their day. And it works a lot better than, how was your day? Because, my kids, nobody's kids want to talk to their parents about their school day when they come home. But it's really just a tool to facilitate conversation. It works really well with some people because it gives you something tangible. For some people, it just feels overwhelming. And if you're in the middle of this and it feels like it's not useful, just wrap it up and move on. And if it feels really useful, you can keep diving in. Next slide. So we're going to look at one more strategy, and this is, not really a trick or a technique. It's just something to keep in mind. Our strategy in these conversations is trying to find every opportunity to draw out that change talk, to evoke the other person's own arguments for the change. So in this case, it would be their own arguments for getting the vaccine. So we could ask questions like, and really the strategies to evoke that are asking good open questions that are structured in a way to get at that. from what you know, what might be some of the risks from not getting vaccinated? If they're talking a lot about, oh, the risks of the vaccine and this and that and the other, we could ask them, from what you know, what might be some of the risks of not getting vaccinated? What would have to happen for you to feel ready to get the vaccine? Sometimes this one's called the magic wand. If some magic wand, if I had a magic wand and all of a sudden I could wave it and you felt comfortable that the vaccine was safe, how would being vaccinated right now impact your day-to-day life? If you were to decide to get vaccinated, what would be your most compelling reason? So this is sort of the hypothetical. Like, I'm not saying you're going to, but if you were to decide to get vaccinated, what would be the argument that's most compelling for you? And again, the thought behind these is just that we're just getting curious about the other person's point of view. Next slide. Oh, all right. So my contact information is here, and you can certainly feel free to contact me, but we intentionally left some time because we want to hear from you about your experiences. So what are the conversations that you're having that are challenging? And what are the things that you've tried that work? What are the things that have been successful for you in the context of conversations about the vaccine? And I think, Elena, you can remind people of the various ways that they can jump in and join the conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you are joined on the computer, you can press the unmute button to unmute yourself. If you're joined by phone, you will have to press *6 to unmute yourself. But we would welcome anyone to ask me any questions or share some successes that you've had in conversations with staff or coworkers or residents, etc., with the rest of us so that we can learn from you as well. So again, we'll open the floor to all of our participants to share or ask any questions.
Folks can feel free to type in the chat as well.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So my name is Katie, and I'm a primary care pharmacist in an ambulatory care setting, so family medicine. And I really have loved the question or the asking for permission to tell them more. I have found that to be very helpful for patients that are on the fence and they tell me their reasons why they don't want to do it. And that just kind of opens the door for them to be able to listen a little bit to what I might have to say. So I love that strategy. I think the hardest folks I have, I think it's mostly because I just don't know how to respond, are those patients who come in and they want nothing to do with it. I mean, they sit down and even bringing up, oh, I'm reviewing your vaccinations. I see you're up to date, but I don't see a COVID vaccine on here. And just immediately the shutdown, nope, not getting it, don't even want to talk about it. Those are the patients that I have not figured out a strategy besides just my blanket, I highly recommend getting the vaccine. So I would love to hear some strategies for those type of folks.
Yeah, I'm inviting other folks to think about if they've had that experience and how they've navigated their way through. I'll share a little bit. For me, that reaction reminds me so much of the reaction that I used to get a lot when I was working in primary care and having conversations with people about their tobacco use. We would have these people who it had been, they'd been lifelong smokers, and they felt very almost like harassed about it. They were like, I can't come into a single visit without somebody trying to talk to me about my smoking. And they were just very defensive, very shut down, and they didn't want to have another conversation. So I think, number one, Katie, it isn't anything you did, but they probably are carrying the baggage of a lot of what we're hearing in the community. They've probably heard it from other people. And so they're walking in a very defensive stance. And sometimes we're able to soften that a little bit, and sometimes we just aren't. If you wanted to try to soften it, one thing you could try is just to reflect on their unwillingness, to say, gosh, it just really seems like you are not wanting to have this conversation. And see what they say. They may say, absolutely not. And you can say, yeah, it probably feels like a lot of people are coming at you and trying to force you to get the vaccine. Does that sound accurate to your experiences? Yeah, it really does. I wonder, what do you make of that? And just kind of get curious about their resistance and not wanting, sort of holding back. I know for me, my impulse is to start, educating and persuading right away. But what I find is that where I can find little sort of cracks in the facade or cracks in the armor is if I just get curious in a really empathetic way about what it's like for them right then in that moment. It must feel really awful to feel like everybody is coming at you with ideas about what you're supposed to be doing, and you're just not ready to take that action, and just show them that empathy. It may not work, but, I feel like if we have a chance with those people who are so defended, it's going to be through coming at them with just heavy, heavy doses of empathy and a little bit of curiosity about what's that experience like for you.
I think that's really helpful. I mean, at the very least, maybe just instead of just pulling away from that conversation, just being curious. I love the curiosity and kind of putting aside, okay, we're probably not going to get to the point of vaccine today, but just at the very least, having a positive experience with someone in the healthcare setting about the vaccine. I think that I love that idea.
Absolutely. And that used to be someone who was sort of a mentor to me as I was working with a lot of those people having those smoking cessation conversations, just said, just shift the goalpost. The goalpost isn't you're not going to get them to quit smoking in the course of your, 5 to 10 minute conversation as they came in for something else entirely. But if you can get them to not dread the next conversation, that's a win. How about other folks? Have other people had similar experiences to Katie, and how have they navigated through it? Or do you have different experiences that are really challenging that you want to toss out to the wisdom of the group?
One question I have, Mia, which might be helpful as well, because there's obviously a lot that goes into motivational interviewing. And if someone was getting started, like this is the first time they're really hearing about motivational interviewing, and they kind of want to take baby steps getting into it, is there one strategy or a suggestion that you would give for someone just starting out with using some motivational interviewing strategies?
I think for me, if you want to just try to dive in and get started somewhere, would be listen more. So just work on shifting your objective to make sort of one of your goals in the conversation be to really hear the other person and to lean into empathy. So, you know, empathy is not pity. It's not feeling bad for the other person. It's not agreeing with their point of view. It's just working to understand that point of view. And so I think sometimes we work so hard, particularly in the context of healthcare conversations, we work so hard to be understood that we forget that part of our role in those conversations is also to understand the other person. And so I would say if you have to start somewhere, just start with that. Some of the skills, you know, they're not rocket science. Asking open questions isn't, you know, it's not like this genius thing that you need a PhD to figure out. It's, you know, shifting the way you formulate those questions, but they are hard to do in the moment. So I would encourage you not to try and do all of it at once. Start somewhere. And I'll also put in a plug for, there are some more opportunities coming for learning with motivational interviewing with Superior Health. And one of them that's coming up that you, if you're curious, you can pay it, or if you're interested, you can pay attention for an announcement shortly about a learning collaborative where we really just work on doing some skill development. So it's not going to be a whole lot of instruction. It's going to be some guided hands-on practice. And that's really the best way to learn. So I see a couple questions in the chat. So how do you respond to misinformation? I think for me, there is a desire to want to correct those myths, right? And recognizing that I want to be really sensitive as I'm doing that, because I don't want people to feel like I'm sort of being a know-it-all or like I'm dismissing their understanding or their knowledge. So if there's a way that it can be a yes and, even if it's yes and I'm correcting you, but you know, like, oh yes, I've heard that as well, or you know, that was something that was really part of the conversation. I heard that on the news a lot as well, you know, or something like that. Or you know, in the example with the Explore Offer Explore, where the person was concerned about the speed that the vaccines came to market. You know, you're right, it did happen faster than some vaccines in the past have happened. So finding the part that you can align with and then gently offering some additional information can be helpful. Another way is to just sort of depersonalize it. So not make it about, you know, what you know is wrong and what I know is right, but say what we've heard from doctors or what the researchers tell us or what the experts have shared, what they've, you know, we might have initially thought this, but what the experts have found is that this. So finding a way to make it feel a little less like a personal attack. Then another question in the chat from Janet. One question I've heard several times is that even if I get the vaccine, I can still be contagious. So how is that helpful? Again, I would just really start with emphasizing and showing empathy for like, yeah, that is confusing because we thought initially that the vaccine was going to protect us from getting COVID and, you know, that it was going to be really this huge safety net that we couldn't catch it and we couldn't be contagious after you got the vaccine. And now we're finding that that's not true. Would it be okay if I share with you though, one of the benefits that we are finding that is holding really true throughout the throughout some of these variants, and then assuming they say yes, it would just be, you know, what we're finding is that even though you can catch it and test positive and you can be contagious, most of the people who are vaccinated aren't the ones being hospitalized and they're not the ones getting so sick and dying from COVID. So although it may not protect you from, you know, catching it and testing positive, it can protect you from some of the most extreme impacts of COVID, which is hospitalization and death. What do you make of that? Right? So again, sharing it and then asking for their reactions. How have other people done that, responding to misinformation or that question about, well, I can still catch it, so why get vaccinated? Other people have some responses that have worked well for them.
Go ahead. me off mute. No, you off mute. Well, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. Well, we present this information to our staff also, and they still decline. I believe that it is in our population in our area, Detroit. Um, there's a lot of myths and there's a lot of religious reasons, and if they don't want it, they just don't want it. I don't care how we give them the information on what will keep them safe and keep everybody safe. If they don't want it, they just don't want it. And we keep presenting weekly weekly informational in services for them, but I just can't get it to them. So I don't know. Myself, I went to the doctor. I'm one of the ones who did not want the shot. I'm the director of nursing. I went to the doctor, and 3 doctors came in to see me. And the way they presented it to me, they said in the future, I may not be their patient anymore, and I will have to look for a doctor that will accept me who haven't had the vaccination. So it's almost, I didn't feel threatened, but I felt like I was pushed a little bit to get it. So I received my shot, and I don't know. I'm just feeling like if people don't want it, they just won't take it. But in my case, 3 people like stood up over me like, this is where the world is coming to now.
Yeah, they kind of upped the ante for you and gave you another reason to get the vaccine. And the reason being, if you like receiving your care here, this is a requirement. So, we sort of see that in the context of some of what's happening on a federal level where, there's mandates for healthcare workers, workers in long-term care facilities, employees and employers. That's starting to be potentially some other, weight to add to the argument for why, if you want to keep your job, I hear you that this is not important to you. I also hear you that you really value your job here. And how do we navigate our way through this? And really coming alongside your staff who are hesitant to get the vaccine and helping them sort of puzzle it out alongside you, as opposed to thinking about how do I stand up at the front of the room and twist their arm? Because people just don't like that. Like, they don't like to be told what to do. I'm still a petulant teenager at heart. I don't like to be told what to do. I don't think any of us like to be told what to do, really. Sometimes we are, and, but, given that there's this new regulation that we have to mandate vaccines, help them sort of puzzle it out. What do you think you'll do about that?
Okay, so I agree with you on that regard. Okay, so I'm the administrator. I'm Cassandra. I took my shot probably February, March, somewhere in there. Oh, I was more than hesitant now. But it was not a job that encouraged me and never will. For me, it was my father saying, basically, do you want to see your mother? Because my mother has a lot of comorbidities, right?
Yeah.
So that was an easy one for me.
Yeah. Something that meant something that was valuable to you was at stake. Yeah.
Correct. So I think when I speak about a lot of people popped up. Did they hear my voice? Just kidding. So when I hear about a job, I don't think that's the way to go, because I am kind of like you. What's your name, Mia? Mm-hmm. I'm kind of like you in the sense of I still have that teenage heart. It'll probably never go anywhere, honestly. And it's that things really can't be forced down my throat unless it's something that I strongly value. But a job, I'll just say, you know what? I can go somewhere else. You understand what I'm saying? We need people to buy in. And buying in for me is not forcing it down my throat. Because my DON, who you just spoke to, she told me about that when she first came in. She wasn't real honest with y'all. She was very uncomfortable of how that was done and how she felt treated. You don't want people to leave that way. Okay,
right.
You don't.
Yeah.
And so I think that we need to have more education. Because what are we going to do when people say, oh, I want to leave? We already don't have enough nurses. We already don't have enough aides. And so when they say, well, you know what? I'm not going to have it. So what do we do then?
We're not
So
prepared for that.
I
Like we're not
totally agree. And I do really want to, I just want to say that, you know, we don't have control over some of the regulations that are coming down. And we can be really transparent about the fact that we don't have control. And we have choices, though, about sort of where we sit at the table. So we can choose to sit next to our staff and look alongside them, metaphorically, right? And look alongside them at this regulation and say, gosh, this really puts you between a rock and a hard place. Because on one hand, you don't want to get the vaccine. And on the other hand, the feds are saying it has to be mandated and you have to do it if you want to keep working here. How can we move forward together through this? Or you can choose to sit on the side of the table with the mandates and say, we're forcing you to do this. And then you kind of become aligned with that bad guy that they're wanting to push against and be defensive. So, you know, if I have an employer, if I have to go through something that I don't want to do, if somebody's willing to sit alongside me, I'm more willing to take that first step. So I would just encourage you to think about how can you partner with your staff?
So yeah, I agree with you. I
you
think
know,
education early.
Yeah,
To when all this rolls
education,
out, 'cause it's gonna roll out.
Education, empathy, partnership. You know, how can we sort of align ourselves with the staff to support them through that challenging decision? And ultimately, we may lose staff, and that would be a terrible thing. But we have to keep in mind what's in our control and what isn't. So we have just really briefly in the chat, someone said there could also be this mindset of, I really want you to keep working here. You're a very valuable member of our team. What would it take to keep you on our team? Right? So how can we partner with them and show that we value them, we want them, and people appreciate that. People want to work where they are wanted. So we're at time. Elena put in the chat, if you want to continue this conversation, join us on our learning management platform, Connect. There's a link there, and you can post these types of questions and challenges and get feedback from both the staff, us here at Superior Health, and also your colleagues across the region can chime in and share strategies that have worked for them, or even just solidarity and support. So join us there, and I'll toss it back to Elena because we're at time.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Mia. I think this was a great conversation today and was really helpful for all of you that shared, that others could learn from that. And like Mia mentioned, there are going to be additional opportunities for motivational interviewing training in the future. So be on the lookout for invitations to that. If you're interested in additional motivational interviewing strategies focused on vaccination, please let us know on Connect. That's a great place to get our attention. We'll be able to hear you a little bit louder on there and make sure that we're making events and education that satisfy your needs. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we will have this recorded and placed on our YouTube page and also placed within Connect, where you can find it there as well. Thank you all.